Good morning, everybody. It's a tremendous honor to be here at the opening plenary of the Indonesian International Sustainability Forum, and I can only echo the words of the President, the Minister, in expressing just how significant this forum is, not just for Indonesia, but for the world internationally, and for the opportunity to accelerate not just an energy transition from a climate point of view, but from a growth, opportunity, and prosperity angle as well. So it's an enormous honor for me to be here moderating the first plenary and to be joining in with all of you in creating a forum which I hope will be a real tipping point for this agenda, not just in Southeast Asia, but internationally. Now let me invite the other members of the panel to come up and join us. And it's an extraordinary, wonderful panel that we have here today. Minister Pak Luhut, please come and join us. Tan Si Lang, please come and join us. Selwyn Hart, it's wonderful to have you with us here as well. And Ki Widyawati, the CEO of Pertamina, and Helen Mountford, the CEO of Climate Works. We have a wonderful, broad, and diverse panel. So please all come together and join me for the open. So let me just kick this panel off with a couple of observations about what's going on in the global energy transition. And then I'm going to take as little time as possible to do that, because I think you'll be much more interested to hear the views of everybody else on the panel. What's going on? So I want to just start with the recognition that we are on the cusp of an extraordinary transformation of the energy systems across the world. When the major, if you will, kind of both climate and energy forecasting units describe the change that we need to see, what they point to is the following picture. They point to a world in which essentially, and the Minister of Energy described this earlier, we shift towards electrifying the majority of the energy system in the world. So we go from a world where we have roughly, and I will bore everyone with statistics just for a moment, but we go from a world with 28,000 terawatt hours of electricity production every year to one which is 4 times that over the next 30 years. We move into a world where essentially we electrify transport. We electrify much of heating, both industrial and residential. We shift to a world where we go from roughly 10 million tons a year of hydrogen, most of which is produced with fossil fuel, to up to 100 million tons a year. So we are talking about the biggest industrial transformation of the system that we have seen in 100 years. It's an extraordinary, profound change that won't just affect the supply of energy, but will affect every economic activity that depends on energy across the entire system. So that's everything: industry, transport, agriculture, the data centers that we will all become increasingly reliant on. It's the entire economy. So that is why we're here to talk about the energy transition. And we are seeing real change happening. We're seeing, last year was the first year in which there was more investment in clean energy systems than in our traditional fossil and hydrocarbon systems. So that's a real tipping point. In much of the world, not everywhere, but in 90% of the world, the cheapest source of new electrons will come from, and is already coming from, renewable energy, and in particular solar, but also wind. So that is now the cheapest source of new electrons in most of the world, and that is changing everything in terms of not just the supply of energy, but the way in which our economy is beginning to function. So we're at the cusp of this extraordinary change, with more money going into clean energy than, if you will, traditional forms of energy, and with the technological acceleration happening across renewables, across batteries, and batteries are so important here, and of course across many different applications, including ones that previously were seen as incredibly difficult, from aviation fuel through to industrial heat. So it's a revolution. And the next 5 to 10 years are going to be the years in which those countries that are going to become the leaders in this change and that will benefit the most from it will, in a sense, really, really get their act together. Last thing from me before I turn over to the panel is, this is not an easy transition. Anyone who pretends that this is just straightforward and, you know, these long-term projections turn into easy short-term actions is telling you too easy a story. It's a hard challenge because shifting massive, if you will, capital flows, shifting, if you will, industrial systems that are built up over 100 years is a true act of leadership. And it's leadership from the political world, it's leadership from the business world, it's leadership from finance and technology. This is a leadership moment. Let us be absolutely clear. It is not just going to happen because people write nice reports. It's going to happen because people have courage and leadership and wisdom and act in line with that. So I have a perfect panel to help us with the question of how, in fact, the transition can play out, and how, since we're here in Indonesia, and this is truly one of the countries that matters so much. We talk about critical minerals, there are also critical countries. And Indonesia is a critical country in the overall energy transition. So, Pak Luhut, tell us how it's going here. How is the energy transition going in Indonesia? And let's have as an open as conversation as possible, because there's progress, but it's challenging as well. Let's be honest about that. So let's open it up, if you wouldn't mind, with your observations on how's it going here.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy is my old friend. He's the one introduced me about global blended finance, you know, which is I don't understand before, totally. Now, Jeremy, about the just energy transition, government Indonesia commitment is very, very clear on this. So we set up our own task force in order to meet our target 2060 zero emission, but we are trying to make earlier than 2060. We have already 400 projects in place right now. I can give you one example, like Suralaya power plant 2 gigawatt, 2.2 gigawatt. We're going to shut down this. And we have a Cirebon. So we are talking about the concrete project that we are already in pipeline, you know. But the problem, we keep discussing about the financing, you know. While our contribution to carbon emission per capita, I think Indonesia is still much lower compared to developed country. And I explained this to Yellen, Professor Yellen, during the G20. I said Indonesia only 2.5 ton per capita, while US already 14 to 15 ton per capita. And the baseline of this is like 4.5 ton per capita. So we have to be fair to look at this. Mm-hmm. Cannot be like this. Have to be, maybe Indonesia slightly can be like this. Why? Because we have to maintain our economic growth. Our economic growth, last year we grew like 5.something%, and we are planning that we have to grow like around above 6% for the next 10 years in order to go to high income country. We can do that, achievable, because we are, like I mentioned earlier, we have already 400 projects already in place. We just need some of the financing and also about support about the legal issue. So Jeremy, like electricity, like green electricity that we already negotiating with Singapore, for instance. We're going to export to Singapore, the green energy. It's like 2 gigawatt, we can go maybe to 3 gigawatt because a lot of potential here. And we build our own solar panel industry. And this is, I think, our discussion with Singapore. And we are willing to do so. But at the same time, we have also our largest green industrial area in North Kalimantan with hydropower. We are going to, under construction right now, like 9 gigawatt of hydropower. We mix with the solar panel. This one also become a game changer for Indonesia. So our commitment to the zero emission is there, no question about that. But then how do we do it? We have to maintain also our economic growth because the base load have to be there. Without the base load, that could jeopardize our economic growth. That's, I think, my preliminary statement to begin with this discussion, Jeremy.
Fantastic. So I'm going to move through the panel and then come back again, if that's all right.
Yes,
please. Minister Tan Sri Lang, and it's very interesting. I mean, your background is a doctor, right? A medical background, and
healthcare consumes a disproportionate amount of energy.
Well, indeed, right? But you also you've now sort of taken on the role of Minister of Manpower, Minister of Trade and Industry, and Infrastructure. Singapore is going to play such a key role in this region, right, in the energy transition, right? And we've already heard Minister De Hoodt describe, if you will, the potential for Singapore to be a demand driver for clean energy that then will feed all the way into the potential supply of PV solar from this country, not just the electrons, but the manufacturing as well. So describe to us a little bit your thinking about the role that Singapore can play in driving, if you will, the energy transition, not just in Singapore, but in the region as a whole.
Thank you, Jeremy. These are very thought-provoking questions. I must say that I in this particular panel and attending this forum, we are really amongst giants in terms of not literally just the size, the economy, the geography itself, but the fact that many of the thought processes, the thinking, in terms of that alignment towards international cooperation is crucial. And the key to a successful transition, particularly here in ASEAN, where we can actually move it forward quite quickly, the key to it is cooperation. And today, if you look at like what Bapak Luhut just shared, we will be making some announcements later on in the afternoon about upping the ambition. But what we have actually been able to learn from our neighbors, from the countries that surround us, is that every country, regardless of the size, regardless of the different levels of endowments in terms of natural resources, geography, and also financial resources, will have the ability to come together. And the key thing in making this transition a success is interconnectivity. The more highly networked, the more connected we are, the more governments can come together, establish a very clear, very predictable, transparent framework, both in terms of standards as well as regulation. Then you allow private investors, you allow even financial institutions to come together in a very clear, transparent framework to be able to start funding it. And with that, you find that there's massive positive spillover effects that translate into the local domestic economy. Because once there is that predictability, the bankability of every single project then goes up. correspondingly. So that's the first crucial part, that is cooperation. Of course, once that framework has been established, I think we can move a lot faster in terms of investments. If you look at how do we accelerate financing many of these platforms itself, based on the most recent IEA annual report, Southeast Asia only accounts for about 2% of global spending on energy, particularly in terms of renewable energy. And I think we can do a lot more. So with the establishment of the framework, we hope that through many, many Pathfinder projects, we can then provide that stable environment, that stable ecosystem for people to start coming in to accelerate the investments in this area. And of course, last but not least, equally important is that we also have to have this very clear pragmatism about the transition, and that while we pivot towards renewable energy, while we pivot towards green electrons, there is a continued role for us to continue investing in transition technologies, particularly transition natural gas, in terms of making sure that every country who is involved in this pivot will also be able to have secure and resilient supply chains. I think with all of that three parameters in place and working together with the whole of ASEAN as one bloc, I think we will be able to achieve our dreams and our ambitions.
Amazing. So 4 key principles. Regional cooperation to create scale.
Yes.
Right. Real financeable projects, right, that actually add up to, if you will, the investment flows that are needed. The creation of local spillover effects, right, so that we create multipliers in each and every one of the geographies.
That is the only sustainable way moving forward.
Sustainable way. And then pragmatism on the transition,
yes,
so that we pivot in a way, as Minister Luhut said, so that we continue to grow. Right? We have to meet people's aspirations for prosperity and jobs and growth as we pivot. Selwyn, you are the Special Advisor and Assistant to the Secretary General of the United Nations. You travel the world. You come from a region, the Caribbean, which of course has its own very specific challenges, with each island having to deal with not just the transition from, if you will, an energy system point of view, but these deep resilience challenges, given, if you will, the change in the, if you will, the weather patterns. Share with us, if you would, some of the lessons that you've seen about what's critical, right, to enable this transition, right, to work for, in particular, if you will, the emerging markets.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, and it's a pleasure to be here. And Minister Luhut, I want to thank you and congratulate you for convening such an impressive and diverse group of stakeholders. And as you and other ministers have said, we're at an all-in, all-hands-on-deck moment where we all need to work together, and we all need to collaborate to accelerate the pace of the transition, but also to ensure that this transition is fair, it's just, and it's equitable. And Jeremy, I share your initial optimism, or the optimism that you expressed at the beginning on, I would say, the inevitability of the transition. When one looks at where we were, I would say a mere 8 years ago, say 1 year after the adoption of the Paris Agreement in 2016, we were celebrating a record installation of renewables, 180 gigawatts of renewables. That year in 2016, we also celebrated a record sale of electric vehicles, 700,000. Now, those numbers look paltry when compared to where we are 8 years later. Last year, 510 gigawatts of renewables were installed globally, and close to 14 million electric vehicles were sold globally. So the pace of this transition is accelerated, and I dare say it is inevitable. You also pointed to the record investments in clean energy last year. But behind those numbers is an uncomfortable truth. 85% of the clean energy investments last year were in China and the advanced economies. Countries representing 2/3 of the global population attracted a mere 15% of clean energy investments. The reality is that the rest of the world, as this transition is accelerating, the rest of the world is being left behind. And I think, and this is one of the areas of focus of the Secretary General and the United Nations system. One, to ensure that as the pace of the transition accelerates, we don't leave the rest of the world behind. And countries in different geographies and different regions will need different levels of support. But underlying all of this, as the minister said, is a new spirit and a new ethos in international cooperation. The geopolitical division should not be, that we're currently experiencing, should not be an obstacle to what needs to be done on the transition. And we need to work with developing and emerging economies. They will have different circumstances, different situations. Regions will have different specific needs, but we need to ensure that we address the challenges and barriers that these countries face. And these challenges and barriers are well known. We know that public money will not be the solution or the panacea. They need to mobilize massive amounts of private finance. And we need to find ways of addressing the real barriers that different countries and different regions face in mobilizing the private finance that they desperately need to accelerate the pace of the transition. It's the cost of capital. For some, it's debt. For some, it's policy and regulatory reform. And all of these barriers and challenges, none of them are insurmountable. So I know you wanted me to share the experience of the Caribbean, but we're optimistic of where we are. We just need more and strengthened international cooperation and collaboration to help the emerging and developing countries address these real but not insurmountable challenges in accelerating this transition.
So I'll come back to you in a minute on, if you will, those how we overcome the barriers, and it brings us all the way back to, if you will, the money and the finance, and if you will, ways to de-risk, right, the investment flows. Of course, one of the sources of finance that is potentially available for the transition actually sits within the hydrocarbon sector. Right? Let's be clear. I mean, the biggest balance sheets in the world in the energy system are with the big oil and gas companies, both the national oil companies and the international oil companies. So you guys are sitting there with the, if you will, biggest cash flows in the energy system by a country mile. Nikki, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear your perspective on the role that Pertamina can play, right? I realize, in fact, this is a transition. It's not as if you are going to overnight shift all capital deployment from hydrocarbons to green, but there is a transition, right? And it would be, and your role here in Indonesia and beyond is going to be absolutely critical to that transition. So share with us your thinking about how, in fact, you're beginning to, if you will, engage with the energy transition, and where you see the real opportunity for a major player such as Pertamina to make the biggest difference.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. It is a privilege for me to be here amongst the honorable and prominent speakers.
I think you need to...
Okay, thank you, Jeremy.
Even better.
Good. It is a privilege for me to be here amongst the honorable and prominent speakers. So I will explain a bit.
Perhaps bring it a little bit closer to you.
Okay.
Dekatin dikit.
Okay, thank you. So I will explain a bit about the background on how we develop our energy transition pathway in our strategic planning. There is three main considerations that we think is very relevant. First, in energy transition that should be support the economical growth of Indonesia. You know that the government set the ambitious target to transform Indonesia from upper middle income to high income country by 2045. And it will drive to very ambitious economic growth from 5% to 7 up to 8% per year up to 2045.
Still, it would be great. You still need to speak a little bit closer to
No,
the...
okay. So, the energy transition pathway that Pertamina have to contribute, it should support that energy growth. So that why three parameters. First, the energy transition that can increase the GDP per capita from currently 4.9 thousand to become 20,000 US dollar. And also increasing the poverty and strengthening the human capital index of Indonesia. That's the first consideration. The second main consideration, how the energy transition pathway of Pertamina can strengthening the national capability of Indonesia on managing energy trilemma. Currently, in global energy trilemma index, Indonesia in 53rd rank. There is three parameters. For energy security, our position is higher than compared to the average, the global average. On sustainability, environment sustainability, Indonesia position is less behind compared to global average. But there is the one aspect that's still the huge gap, the lag behind, is energy equity, which cover energy affordability and energy accessibility. So there's a big homework for us. How our strategic planning on energy transition can strengthening the affordability and accessibility of energy in Indonesia. And the third consideration, we also have to support the government target on achieving net zero emission by 2060. So from that background, we develop the pathway, we call it the dual growth strategy of Pertamina. The first growth strategy is decarbonizing our oil and gas business. Why? We have to keep maintaining energy security. So to achieve the 7 up to 8% of economic growth, we needed energy as a catalyst. So we have to be able to provide the reliable energy and also the affordable energy that could be accessed by all people in this country. We have several initiatives to reduce the carbon emission, to increase the energy efficiency from all our operation. And we successfully reduced the carbon emission from our operation all the way from upstream to downstream. Up to last year is 35% of carbon emission reduction. And from that achievement, now Pertamina has become the first position in ESG performance amongst the integrated oil and gas company in the world. There is still continued progress. Thank you. And the second of our existing business is developing the energy infrastructure, especially for gas. Indonesia has abundant reserve and resource of gas. But the most challenging part now is infrastructure, especially for the eastern part of Indonesia. So we have to build the LNG terminal, regasification, pipeline, virtual pipeline, so that the first strategy on our growth long-term planning. And the second is develop the low carbon product, low carbon business. Start with the energy source that Indonesia have. So the tagline is unleashing our domestic energy resources, starting with geothermal. Indonesia is the second biggest resource geothermal in the world, and Pertamina has the expertise on that area. So now, from the total 28 gigawatt resources or opportunity, Indonesia now is less than 10%. The geothermal potential is to be operated. So we still a lot of room to increase the capacity of our geothermal. And as Pak Luhut mentioned before, that we need a reliability, we need a base load in order to increase the penetration of renewable energy that have intermittency in our system. The geothermal is the best option for Indonesia. The second, we have also abundant biodiversity. So Pertamina also developed the biofuel. The government already put a regulatory to mandatory blending of biodiesel. Now B35 means 35% coming from bioenergy and mixing and blending with our diesel. From that achievement, we successfully reduced 22.7 million ton CO2 last year per year. So we will add the blending to B40 and B50. In our national energy policy, it should achieve up to B60. And then we will replicate to our gasoline and sustainable aviation fuel. We had a lot of resources to implement that area. And third, we understand that there is still fossil energy in our energy mix, even though by 2060. So to meet net zero emission, we need carbon offsetting, which is carbon capture, utilization storage, carbon capture and storage, and nature-based solution. So those are two dual growth strategy of Pertamina in order to achieve net zero emission, Indonesia Emas 2045, and increase the energy trilemma index of Indonesia.
Thank you. We could actually probably spend the day actually on the kind of the hydrocarbon sector, because it's so important. And as you described, there's a decarbonisation and a driving efficiency in existing operations, and then there's this whole development of infrastructure, whether it's geothermal or elements of gas. There is the bio, if you will, energy story, and then there's carbon capture. So there's a massive agenda that you are integral to and central to the broader transition of the system. Helen, we've known each other for a number of years, which is an enormous pleasure, and find ourselves on platforms across the world. You observed this energy transition, right, over the last decade or more, with ups and downs, right, and with a real sense, I think now, that countries get it, the principle of it, the reasons why, but they're also finding it hard, right? So what are the things that you see that can make the biggest difference, right? In particular, I guess, for the middle-income countries that are going to be so key, both, if you will, in the regions, but also globally. What are the things that can make the biggest difference in your experience to the quality of this energy transition, balancing all the factors that you've heard? That's the easy question.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. That's definitely not the easy question, but an important one, and it's absolutely critical to all that we've been discussing here this morning and through the conference. We do see there's an inevitability to the energy transition, and we've reached a point, and I think, Jeremy, you expressed it so well, we've reached a point where in a number of areas we're seeing exponential growth of clean energy, of electric vehicles, of battery technologies, and they're increasingly cost competitive with the alternatives. It's actually cheaper to build a new renewable energy, a wind or a solar plant, than it is to build a new coal or gas plant. So the way of the future, the way of now, is really moving towards these. But as you said, it's challenging. And one of the things, I'm coming from philanthropy. Climate Works Foundation helps all of philanthropy support governments and countries, including a number of emerging and developing countries, in their own country-driven transitions, energy transitions, and moving forward. So we're here to help support countries as they look to identify approaches and transitions forward. And one of the things we've seen is just the evidence that for many emerging economies, certainly here in Southeast Asia, there's an incredible blessing and incredible wealth of renewable energy resources, the solar, the wind, critical minerals. There's also incredible manufacturing capacity. So there's a real opportunity now to do the energy transition in a way that does lead to more competitive economies, helps boost key sectors, jobs, income, health benefits from reduced air pollution, so much in terms of achieving those development objectives that we discussed first and foremost, and also doing the energy transition we need. And so what we're really focused on is how do we help governments realize that? We have, as you said, the analyses, the evidence, the reports, and here in Indonesia, the Ministry of Planning, Bappenas, 2 years ago, released an excellent report showing the economic and social benefits of the net zero target, achieving that by 2060 or before, as Minister Pak Luhut mentioned, and actually showed that going earlier, 2050, 2045, could deliver even more benefits. But the challenge is, how do you do this, and how do you do it well? And there's 3 areas that we're really helping support countries from a philanthropic perspective, 3 areas that are very much interlinked that I'd like to mention. One is just, how do you help support countries on transitioning the power supply system? So ramping up renewable energy, ramping up grid infrastructure to be able to cope with that, to accelerate that, and also accelerating the phase out of coal. Essential to all of this is ensuring the finance is actually delivered. So how do we do that? And we're doing that together with Bloomberg Philanthropy and multiple partners on the ground in 34 countries, including here in Indonesia and a number of other countries in the region. A couple of examples. One is just here in Indonesia, helping the National Development Bank, PTSMI, to actually set up a platform whereby they can actually make the connections, bring in the finance that's needed for renewable energy, so that that can actually be channeled to where it needs to go. We know it's a challenge, so how do you actually bring that in, make that bankable projects, and deliver that finance? Another example is in the Philippines, right? One of the challenges we know on siting renewable energy or getting infrastructure for grids built is that there's often challenges between some of the developers and some of the local communities. And you want to resolve this in a way that actually ensures communities are brought along and are benefiting, not just pushed along. And this has delayed the development of renewable energy in many, many countries. So in the Philippines, we've got local partners who are working together with the developers of renewable energy, the financiers, the governments, the local communities, the indigenous peoples, to find approaches that actually can accelerate deployment of renewable energy and do so in a way that's environmentally and socially responsible. So multiple ways we're helping to sort of shift with philanthropy, helping to support countries as they shift their power sector. But that's not enough. A second area is really helping to reduce the demand for fossil fuels in key sectors. And one of the exciting opportunities here and in many other countries is electrification of transport. We've seen exponential growth of electric vehicles in many countries and regions, and this is an opportunity for Indonesia, for other countries to get onto this exponential growth curve and really benefit domestically from it. And in Indonesia, the finance ministry put in place a regulation where they were able to reduce, put in place special tax breaks for electric vehicles, for buses, two-wheelers, for cars. Use this to actually drive demand. At, 5 to 10% reduction in price actually led to something like a 30% increase in electric cars year on year. And they graduated this in a way which actually supported local development, local manufacturing of the electric vehicles. So you have the benefits of the local jobs, the industry that can grow here and really support the economy, as well as the benefits of much cleaner air and electric vehicles that are affordable to people. We know that smog, the air pollution here in many, many cities, is killing millions of people each year. So being able to tackle both the air pollution challenge and build local communities is important. Similarly, we're doing work with clean cooling, with the extreme heat waves we're seeing around the world now. We know we need more cooling, and we want that, but it's actually going to lead to more electricity demand. So we've worked with manufacturers and others to prototype 5 times more efficient air conditioners that are affordable, and now working with the community to bring those to market and to scale quickly. So how do you leapfrog over the existing technology to something much more efficient? Then there's many other areas. But the final area that I'd like to highlight in terms of some of the support we and others are providing to governments to really tackle these challenges is really on the just transition. We know this cannot happen without finding ways to transition the communities, the workers, to benefit local communities as we go through this. And we're working with the IKEA Foundation and a number of partners here in Indonesia and South Africa, in Vietnam, to look at how to actually do this transition from a fossil fuel economy, from coal, from oil and gas, to something which will be much more sustainable, a more diverse economy, a much more rich economy as we go forward. And that includes a strong focus on how do you do this as well with critical minerals. We want and we need a sustainable supply of critical minerals to help the transition, and it must be done in a way that is environmentally and socially sustainable. So working again to support countries to actually deliver that.
Helen, thank you. So I've been a very generous, maybe too generous a moderator in giving people a chance to sort of put their perspective, and these are complex, if you will, if you will, dimensional views of how we unlock a transition. I'm going to be a bit tougher, okay, because I want to do another round with everybody, but I'm going to be asking people to really hold themselves to a couple of minutes each. And I've got one simple question, which is, we're at the Indonesia International Sustainability Forum, and it's 5 years from now. And we've made real progress. So all these complicated barriers, they're all true, right? Every single one of them, right? But we've made real progress, and we've surprised ourselves with how much progress. And that's an Indonesia story. We keep on making more progress than maybe people thought was possible 5 years ago. Look at the change. So we're 5 years from now. Where have we made the biggest progress, right? And what was the game changer that helped make that happen? Right? So if you wouldn't mind, kick us off, give us some energy, ambition, and a sense of, yes, we can do this, right? And there's no one better to do that than yourself, Pat Lahoud. So kick us off. You've got 2 minutes to set the tone for this round of the panel.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. I think I mentioned earlier that we're going to announce soon about around 62 gigawatt renewable energy pipeline now. So that's one. Number two, if you look at the number EV in this country, last year only 12,000 production. With the new incentive that we provide, I think the BYD can go for the production up to 300,000 within this coming year. So then we have like 132 million of motorbike. We're going also to speed up, to convert this to the EV. And this is, I think, the big program. And we going to have our own solar panel industry. So then no issue anymore about local content. So that's the reason also that our negotiation with Singapore moving very well. So then we can export now the energy, green energy to Singapore. But at the same time, we also look at our own interests.
Yep.
See, like I mentioned to you, within 8 years' time, you can see green EV production from Indonesia.
Yeah.
Because our hydropower construction going to be in place by 8 years from now. So in North Kalimantan, you can see maybe the aluminium green production, EV production, even to the petrochemical green production, because we're going to use the green energy. So that's, I think, the dreams. Then whether this is achievable or not, of course achievable. Because I believe we can establish collaboration. Nothing we cannot do. We can do everything. So I'm pretty confident, like I mentioned to you before, when we promote the e-catalog about the digitalization in this country, anything we can do. So we can reduce low sulfur energy in this country, starting any times in this coming month. So this also can save energy a lot and save also the subsidy without disturbing the small medium enterprises like a motorbike. So that's, I think, we should see the equilibrium of this. We are carefully to watch or to issue any policy could hurt the small medium enterprises or the ordinary people. So that's, I think, about energy. But at the same time, Jeremy, we are lucky that we have 600 gigaton of carbon capture storage. You cannot go to zero emission without injecting the CO2 to this carbon capture storage area. And we have it in Indonesia a lot.
Yep.
That's the reason I said the green production in North Kalimantan, because the CO2 we can inject in that area. So yeah, Indonesia blessed by God. So we can do everything if you manage this well. And I believe the next government, the new administration, understand this fully. And we just keep going. I don't see any problem in this. Problem can be faced by the government of Indonesia. I'm pretty confident in this.
Amazing. Thank you for setting the tone. Whoa.
Thank you.
That is the ambition, right, that we need to see. And if we saw that across the world, right, we would be not only tackling the climate challenge, but we'd be unlocking prosperity and the, if you will, the just transition that Helen was describing. Minister Lang, right, so you've got to actually now, this is not competitive, but it's a little bit competitive, right? Build on what Pak Luhut has offered us and share, for 5 years from now, some of the things that you've been hoping for are happening. Paint the picture.
I think that we're very excited, and I think in 5 years you can actually develop lots. And the key to making sure that we get the traction and also maintain the cadence and the momentum is through multiple Pathfinder projects. And whatever Pak Luhut talked about, I mean, he's going to develop. In fact, just now in the presentation up there, the video, they're going to produce something like 3,000 over gigawatts of clean energy. On top of that, there's geothermal. So with the multiple Pathfinder projects that we can work collectively together between Singapore, Indonesia, between the multiple countries within ASEAN itself, I think we have a very, very good pathway, very clear pathway towards achieving those goals in 5 years. So my vision in 5 years, we would have a very integrated, well-connected ASEAN power grid where the intermittence for solar renewable energy, wind renewable energy can be supplemented, complemented by a very advanced geothermal network, which Pak Luhut was talking about. Also, with base load supplied by the hydroelectric power from Sarawak, from North Borneo. And then you see that in times when there is no sunlight, when there's no wind. In other parts of Southeast Asia where you have abundant sunlight, wind, hydroelectric power, that can be complementary and supplementary. Then I think we would have arrived. It would be a very nice, clean, green, renewed ASEAN. Thank you.
Amazing. That's a brilliant vision. And it's a vision not just about the technicalities of an electricity grid. It's a vision about the cooperation between nations, right? And how we together can solve problems and open up opportunities. So thank you for that. So, I want to stay in the optimism. We're 5 years from now, we're actually cracking this because we are building off these exponential changes. We are delivering our 62 gigawatts. We are cooperating because we can and we need to. Paint the picture 5 years from now from your point of view,
Okay,
where we're winning.
5 years from now, we'll be 1 year away from 2030, and we would be on track to meet the goals, the global goals that were agreed on last year in Dubai at COP28 to triple renewable energy and double energy efficiency globally. This means that the 2/3 of the global population that's currently attracting a mere 15% of clean energy investments, that increases exponentially. And that we have all countries and all regions being part of the clean energy revolution. And this also means ensuring that persons, the 800 million persons globally who still lack access to electricity, have access to electricity. 5 years from now, I'm hoping that Minister Luhut realizes his vision and that Indonesia really fulfills its potential as a global and regional clean energy powerhouse, that it capitalizes on its strategic location, its rich endowment in clean energy, its highly skilled workforce, and its reputation for policy certainty. So my vision is twofold: a global vision where we are on target and countries catch up, but also for countries like Indonesia really to be powering not only their economies and regional economies, but also providing the clean energy technologies that are absolutely needed to power a new global economy as well.
Selwyn, thank you. And I think that's more than just a vision, right? And we all have visions, right? But when we have visions with real plans, then we can actually deliver real change, right? And I actually think that we do have the plans. There are, in truth, some real challenges in getting those plans to happen. Ibu Nike, we're 5 years from now. Pertamina is a transformed company under your leadership, right? Describe in your own words what that company is doing for Indonesia and how it's at the heart of the transition.
Yeah.
Close to the mic.
Yeah, thank you. Our vision for the next 5 years, Indonesia achieve the energy security and independency. So now we still import the fossil energy. So the next 5 years, we will able to shift the imported fossil energy to domestic green energy resources that also create the industrialization upstream and downstream that could increase the energy per capita of Indonesia. And as a form of commitment, Pertamina allocated the capex for the next 5 years is 15% for low carbon business, and then another 15% for sustainable budget tagging, as well as asset integrity to reduce the losses, the energy losses. So there's our vision as a state-owned enterprise. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And Helen, right? You have almost the final word in terms of it's 5 years from now.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Where have we won?
Thank you, Jeremy. And I can be brief because all of what others said, we want to see that the economies have made the transition or are making the transition. They're prospering from it. It's benefiting people, it's leading to jobs, industry, energy security, all of that. And I guess three things I'd add briefly to it. One, the finance sector is really coming behind and helping support that transition. We're not quite there yet. Still too much finance going to the old, to coal, to fossil fuels, not enough yet to renewables and clean. So one is the finance sector. Two is the partnerships. And I think the partnerships with industry, with state level or provincial level governments, others, is going to be so essential. And we're seeing that happen. CADEN, the Chamber of Commerce here, is working with the really leading industries on moving forward to net zero. And then the third area is, again, that just transition, making sure we do this in a way that brings people, that brings communities along so they benefit from the transition, is going to be essential. So that's the three pieces I'd add to the rest of the vision. Thank you.
Helen, thank you. So let me just summarize by saying it is very easy in this territory of climate and energy to get stuck with all the things that aren't quite right. Let's be very frank with ourselves. And the Secretary General, I mean, has been out in the Pacific and has been very clear about the fact that we are playing with fire, literally playing with fire, in the sense that we are so close to, if you will, crossing some key tipping points when it comes to our planetary operating system. Right? And we're not moving fast enough on the transition, even though the technology is there and in theory the finance is there. So we have a real challenge on our hands. But if I know one thing from the, I guess, 25 years that I've been working in this space, is that if we place in front of ourselves this sense of the opportunity that could be available and is available, right, not to just have visions, but to have concrete actions and plans. And I guess, Pat Lahoud, you do exemplify for me someone who is always about projects, plans, delivery, implementation, enough words, more action. If we can actually embrace that spirit, all the things that have been described on the panel, right? The transformation of the energy system, the development of new industrial opportunities, embracing SMEs, right? Really embracing that SME sector, bringing on board, if you will, the 800, 900 million people who don't have access to energy. And Indonesia is a very fortunate country in the sense that you do have 100% electrification, more or less. So if we can embrace the spirit of opportunity and practical, deliverable action on this panel, then there is a whole world of opportunity in front of us. And this energy transition can, I think, be an extraordinary 5 years for the development of this country, the region, and a positive change in the world that benefits everybody. So thank you to the panel. Let me ask you to put your hands together to show your appreciation.